Perception in the Workplace by Philip Nicole, Jessica Pickle, and Tim Yip. If you are following along in the textbook, we are starting on page 144. Perception checking. This is discussed in the Perception in the Workplace section of the textbook, but a more in-depth look is on page 132. Perception is important because it is the process where we assign meaning to the world around us. When we communicate to each other, we can jump to conclusions by looking at a person's body language. By seeing something that is not there, then it can lead to questions that are not relevant to what the conversation is about. Elements of perception checking. A description of the behavior you noticed. This can be very critical to your first impression of the conversation. This will lead you to what the person is communicating. Next step is to see at least two possible interpretations of the behavior. This is important because you want to look at the situation from multiple angles and see why they're communicating in this particular manner. Because if you're only interpreting the situation from one way, then you can perceive the wrong aspects of the conversation and can lead to not fully understanding the means of the communication. A request for clarification is if you are unsure about what is being communicated to you, and you can reinforce that you understand the communicator fully. When using the perception checking technique, you need to take these three things into consideration. Completeness, which is sometimes you do not need to go through all the steps of the process, and that the simplest answer is the right one, but you want to fully understand the situation if your answer can sound judgmental. Verbal congruency is when you have finished your perception check, and you need to be aware of your nonverbal actions and act in a way that reflects the appropriate action. The tone of your voice needs to be watched so it does not seem like you have a closed mind when giving a request for clarification. Rules are important because in some cultures it is a more straightforward approach, when in other cultures they take a less direct approach. This should be taken into consideration before you proceed, so the person is comfortable with the situation.
First impressions are very important in the workplace, but it's particularly important during the interview process, since research has shown that interviewers make up their mind within the first 4 minutes, so a good first impression is necessary. Although this can also mean that people who are good interviewees may get a job over a person that would make a good employee. So let's look at an example of the interview process for the Toronto Rehabilitation Centre looking to hire a new kinesiologist. These are the two candidates, Dr. John Smith and Mr. Fred Johnson. Based on the first impression of how they look, Mr. Johnson would get the job because he looks more professional. A question that an interviewer commonly asks is something like, "Tell me about yourself." This isn't always a good question because you can't tell if the individual is telling the truth or just telling you what you want to hear. Based on their answers, Mr. Johnson would probably have the edge over Dr. Smith, even though Dr. Smith may be the better employee. Behavioral interview techniques are now used so that the best employee is hired over the good interviewee. These techniques focus on the candidate's past behaviors, which will predict their future behaviors. If we go back to our candidates and use the behavioral interview techniques, I may ask them to tell me about a time when a patient did not want to do their rehabilitation exercises. From this, it is easier to tell who is lying and a better way to choose the right candidate, which in this case is Dr. Smith.
Finally, we reach empathy. The textbook talks about empathy as a means of removing communication barriers between professionals and their clients. To illustrate this, I would like to use a case study published in the Journal of Gerontology on Jason. So first, some background. Jason is an African American man in his mid-30s working as an activities director in a nursing home. While the majority of us can sympathize with the sick and the dying, there are perhaps only a few who can empathize with them the way Jason can. That is because Jason himself was shot and left in a coma for a month in critical condition. I thought Jason's unique experiences will make him more empathetic towards the patients he works with because he has a personal experience with death. And while Jason never mentions empathy at all in the entire interview, it became clear that it was still there. This is perhaps the most powerful example, an excerpt from the interview. In Jason's own words, a lot of them, referring to the residents, don't want to be here. They worked all their lives to own a house and now they're being taken from their homes, and a lot of them don't have nobody. They may not understand when you say hello to them, but you still got to treat them right. Jason's example showcases the importance of empathy in the workplace. As healthcare workers, because of the nature of the work and being around the sick so often, some of us may experience being momentarily overwhelmed. In Jason's case, his ability to identify and connect with his clients allows him to be capable of respecting them, greeting them regardless if they're unable to understand his hello.
Thank you for listening.